Good morning, everyone. My name is Kari Osland. I'm a senior research fellow and also head of the research group on peace, conflict, and development here at NUPI. Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this seminar today, focusing on Mali and the broader Sahel. Before we start, I should inform you all that this seminar is streamed directly on YouTube, just so that you know when you post your questions and comments. So, the inhabitants living in this area, but also the international community, are faced with a range of serious challenges. To name a few: weak states, transnational crime, jihadist insurgencies, poverty, refugees, and lack of economic development. As the international community and Europe fear a deepening of the crisis, the region is higher on the international agenda than it has ever been before, with several international interventions by France, Operation Barkhane, the United Nations with MINUSMA, and several EU operations, CivCap Sahel and EUTM Mali. Despite all these efforts and the conclusions of a peace agreement for Mali in Algiers in 2015, the situation on the ground is not improving, and in Mali the conflict has spilled over from the northern to the central region. The questions that will be discussed in this seminar is if current approaches contains the right balance between security and development, and what balance there should be between the priorities of external stakeholders and the local needs in the region. To inform us all and to talk about this, it is a great pleasure to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Abdoulaye Diop. Ambassador Diop is now serving as Special Advisor to the Executive Secretary of the African Capacity Building Foundation and is based in the African Union in Addis Ababa. More recently, Ambassador Diop served as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Mali as the country was recovering from a political and security crisis. As Foreign Affairs Minister, Diop worked on behalf of the Malian government as a chief negotiator in the drafting of the 2015 peace accords with rebel groups. His CV is very long and impressive, but I will mention a few more relevant posts. As chair of the Council of Ministers of the G5 Sahel countries, Diop was instrumental in mobilizing international support for the operationalization of the G5 Sahel joint force, aimed at combating terrorism and setting a regional development agenda for the Sahel. Ambassador Diop has also served as director of the World Food Programme Africa Office, as Mali's ambassador to the United States, and he has been a senior diplomatic advisor to 2 presidents of Mali. So please, Ambassador Diop, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. After such a wonderful introduction, I think my work will be just easy. And I'm also so impressed by the few people that I have the chance to greet this morning, and impressed by the understanding, the knowledge of Mali, Africa, West Africa, and the Sahel, that I was wondering if my coming here would be even useful, because many of you have lived in this area. You have probably a good grasp of the situation in the region. But just to tell you first how happy I am to have this opportunity to come in Norway for the second time. I was here in 2016 to participate in the Nordic Africa meeting convened by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway. This time, I want, first of all, to thank NUPI for the invitation. My friend, Mr. Bøås, I learned to pronounce correctly his name just yesterday, because I was not sure it's Bøås, but they correct me, it's Bøås, which make it just easier. So my friend Bøås, Kari, Natasha, and the entire team here, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to know the work of the Institute, which is quite impressive, and also to have the opportunity to contribute to the understanding of the situation in the Sahel, in Mali, in Africa, our issues of common interest between Europe and Africa, including the Sahel. So I want to also thank my great friend, Ambassador Lindman. I think Kari, his wife, is here in the room, and his son. So I will ask Kari, Berit. I have been mixed since yesterday. I was having a hard time to just make the distinction between Kari and Berit. So I just missed it, but maybe it's because of the color of your hairs. Just to convey my deep appreciation to Ambassador Lindman, a friend who made this possible for me to come here, and also to contribute to the good friendship between our two countries. As for the subject that I have, I will try to do my best to cover the Sahel and Mali and the balance between security and development. It's possible that I could venture beyond the subject, and at times maybe I might not cover exactly or respond to the specific questions, but maybe when we will go into the question and answer session, probably you can pin me to a specific point, which I will be glad to respond. For our work today, I have few notes. I will want to first focus on just giving some brief on the historical context of the Sahel, just to make sure that we are speaking about the same thing. And I will also try to explain what I call the Sahel paradox. While we have this region which is depicted as one of the poorest regions, facing so many challenges in terms of security and development, and yet the region has a significant human, mineral, and natural resources which could have been an asset for the region, which could have better positioned this region, which could in return contribute to the prosperity of Africa, but also to the prosperity of Europe as well. I will try also to talk about the geopolitics of the Sahel. It can be complicated, but just briefly to give some information. And I will also touch on the geography and the significance of this location, both for Africa and for the rest of the world. I will talk about the regional and external intervention and the militarization of the region. We will try together to understand the sources of conflicts in this region, and I will specifically come to the current specific security situation in the Sahel countries. I will also address the situation in Mali, the peace process. Just briefly, I can touch on those ones. And finally, I could come to some conclusions in terms of recommendations about how to address mainly the security and the development challenges, and what could be the sort of balance that we can, I hope I can be developing my thought as described. So regarding the historical context, we must say that the Sahel has played a key role not only in Africa, but it has contributed to the world historical, cultural, political, and economic evolutions. Sahelian people have, through ecology and society, offered rich and valuable aspects of their history and culture to the world at large, interacting with one another and with the outside world through land, commerce, natural resources, and pastoralism. The arid nature of the region and the predominantly occupational lifestyle of its populations with transboundary migration has contributed to limited economic opportunities that exacerbate poverty and human security challenges. But there is no denying that the Sahel is fraught with multiple challenges, often exacerbated by external centers of powers. But the reality of the Sahel is that this region is endowed with the overwhelming abundance of natural resources and people, which, if managed equitably and sustainably, can turn the region's fortunes around. In fact, the Sahel is home to some of the continent's top producers of oil, gold, and uranium, to name few. These very natural resources have rendered the region an arena for geopolitical competition from many actors outside of the continent. Regarding the geopolitics of the Sahel region, we are talking, it may depend also, the definition of the Sahel could be different when we are talking to the UN or when we are talking the African Union. For the UN perspective, we are talking about 10 countries. Namely, I will come to the list of the countries later on because there is a, but for the African Union, it's about 11 countries. No matter what, I think we are more or less talking about the same region. We are talking about a population of about 300 million people, 10 or 11 countries, and we have about 30 million, about 10% of the population of the Sahel is facing food insecurity. 4.9 million have fled their homes to live in the camps as refugees or internally displaced people. 1 in 5 children under the age of 5 suffer from acute malnutrition. The impact of climate change and mass population exodus from increasingly sparsely inhabited areas is twofold, leading to the following processes. The first is the southward movement of the population toward a more moderate climate, a movement intensified by conflicts over the inhabitable areas. The second is the forced migration and human trafficking, both of which have received considerable attention from within Africa and outside of Africa. This development began to emerge in the 80s. Today, climate change is perceived as one of the key drivers of conflicts in the Sahel, and probably in the years to come, if measures are not taken to sustainably handle our resources, climate change will continue to be one of the key drivers, not only for migration, but also for instability, because the movement of people will be mainly driven by the climate negative impact. Where such conflicts also will occur, we know that today there are about 37 insurgencies, transnational jihadist group and liberation movement operating in the Sahel, which represent about 21% of such groups in the entire continent, which is quite worrisome as a prospect. Now, let me talk about the geography and the significance of this location. Geographically, the Sahel comprises a narrow strip. I'm talking to people who knows everything about this already, but that allow me to repeat that geographically the Sahel comprises a narrow strip of arid land and semi-arid land that form a transition zone between Sahara at the north and the African savanna in the south. It's made up of flat, barren plains that stretch roughly on about 5,400 kilometers across Africa. Just to give us a sense, probably it's bigger than the whole Western Europe, what we're talking about. Geopolitically, 10 African countries make the Sahel, namely Burkina Faso, Chad, Cameroon, Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, Nigeria, Niger, and Senegal. This is from the UN definition. If you add the AU, it will be much longer. So this Sahel also is located within the continuum of different proximities from the rich savanna in the south and the Sahara Desert in the north, bordering southern frontiers of the countries of North Africa. The Sahel also operates as a geopolitical corridor linking West, Central, and East Africa on one side, if it's accepted that the greater Sahel extend from Mauritania and Senegal in the west up to Djibouti in the east. Commonly, it is characterized by low and unreliable annual rainfall. Beyond the Sahara, the Sahel is connected to North Africa through a network of roads and traditional camel routes. Because of its geographical proximity to Europe, the Sahel comprises a transit zone linking Africa south of the Sahel itself, North Africa, and then Europe, just to demonstrate the links between all of us. Accordingly, the region geopolitics are an expression of multiple interdependent economic and political spaces and interests, integrated through legal trade, through also illicit transnational migration and trafficking in narcotics, small arms, and people. Now coming to the regional interventions and the trends toward a militarization of the Sahel, we can say that the multiplication of the operation in the Sahel is also indicative of the preference by both international partners and entities for military solution to the problem of the Sahel as what might be considered as an exit out of a very complicated and socio-economic solution. It can be just the easiest way that some actor could choose to resolve this problem. So what we call the militarization is mean that today we have so many external forces present in the region. We have MINUSMA, which is the UN mission for the stabilization of Mali. We have French Operation Barkhane, which is in charge of fighting terrorists as per a mandate from the UN Security Council. We have also some European troops there to train the Malian soldiers. There is a military component as well as a civilian component. If you take even MINUSMA, I think MINUSMA has the highest number of European countries involved in this process. I'm not talking about the presence of the Americans and the Germans who are coming, so that's what we call, and even the Sahel countries themselves, maybe they are putting forward the military means in terms of responding to this, even though I will just explain why we have to use the military means and why it's necessary, but yet we need to think of the longer-term solution. So the militarization of the region does not come without an economic cost, of course. For example, the cost of the Operation Barkhane, which is the French operation, is about $650 million per year. The MINUSMA, which is the UN mission, is about $1 billion per year. And then we have the joint force of the G5 Sahel, which is for the first year costing about $450 million. The European training mission is estimated just for the first 15 months at about 12 million euros. As for the United States of America, in 2016 alone, it spent $156 million on the training of forces in Chad, in Niger, and in Nigeria, and under the US-led offensive against Boko Haram in Nigeria. In 2017, the US have also allocated about $60 million to the group of G5 Sahel countries. At the level of state of the G5 Sahel themselves, meaning Mali, Burkina, Chad, Niger, and Mauritania, security spending in few years after its inception of the G5 Sahel, currently our expenditures stands between 6 and 7% of our GDP. Burkina Faso is spending $160 million on the military expenditure. Chad, $170 million. Mali, $469 million. Mauritania, $150 million. Niger, $200 million. Thus, countries of the Sahel cannot at the same time finance their development and embark on a social expenditure which is exploding as a result of demography and security expenditure, which has been triple or quadruple just in few years. Currently, it is safe to state that the Sahel region has never been so militarized. With insurgencies and counter-insurgency forces of various tribes. Veteran forces like those from France and the US have recently been joined by troops from Italy and Germany, and by a new generation, new regional coalition, as well as by forms of warfare, W-A-R, warfare new to the region, such as use of drones and presence of transnational extremist group within with origins from Middle and Near East. Now, how can we understand then the causes of these conflicts which have resulted in this militarization of the region? According to the UN Economic Commission for Africa, which made a report, which was a significant report on the conflict in the Sahel, explain the causes, the sources of this conflict in twofold. The causes which are structural and those who are proximate. So the structural cause of the conflicts include the environmental stress, which has described it just earlier, because of the nature of the region, which is not receiving enough rainfall and is facing with multiple challenges, which exercise also big pressure on the livelihood of the people. The second is the historical grievances. To varying degrees, this has complicated intergroup relation and political dynamic and state-building processes across the Saharan countries. The third structural source is the fractured state-making process. Forging a common national identity and a collective destiny among the people within Sahelian states have been deep-seated challenge at the root of many conflicts, including in my own country, Mali. The fourth is what we call the youth bulge. Sahelian countries have high youth population with more than 60% of the population under the age of 25, which can be an asset, but it can also be a bomb on which we are sitting if we don't handle our young people and provide them with perspective as well as job and opportunities. Now, the second range of the source of conflict, which are estimated to be proximate, are mainly the migration across the Sahelian country, which is a feature of life among Sahelian people, but not only driven by climatic conditions. It's also driven by poverty, economic condition, lack of governance, inclusiveness in many of the African countries. Food insecurity also is one of the sources. Politicized military coups, mutinies, overt and covert interventions in politics have been regular occurrence in many countries of the front line. The fourth is the rise of the jihadi and criminal networks in the region. The fifth is the regional and cross-border conflicts and insecurity. And the last one is the global dynamics of and the role of the external partners. And one of the role is even the way many external partners have tried to describe the Islamic extremism and to oppose Islam and the West has been one of the key drivers also for this situation. Now, if I come to the current situation in the Sahel, because this was mainly to give us a background, so it's not even a background, I think just snapshots, and so we can see, because this is our complex issues for which I think we can probably go even for a PhD. It's quite complex. Now, if I try also to come to the current situation of the Sahel, mainly the security situation of the Sahel, I think we can say that the Sahel is continuing to be faced with significant challenges for security and development at the same time. Terrorist groups which evolve in the Sahel, mainly the JINIM, I don't know if you know, they said the group, I don't know how to say it, it's the group to, I don't even want to repeat this because the name of the group tend to say that it's a it's a group constituted to support Islam and Muslim. While my own understanding is these people are not even Muslims. So Islam and Muslim as being used by these people just because they are just criminals, they're terrorists, they're traffickers, and they need an ideology to justify what they're doing. That's why I don't want even to give them this, you know, most of the time I don't even want, because in many of the Western, the research center, you need to help us. Because, you know, what you call the jihadis, I don't think that we need to call them jihadis, because jihadis is the brand that they have given to themselves. Because jihad, as per the religious scriptures, means to do a war in the name of God. But the jihad also, there are conditions under which, and there are also historical background and context in which jihad happens. So those who are today doing this fight are not doing it in the name of God. By calling them jihadists, we legitimate them as people who are fighting for God. I think the best way is just to call them terrorists. We don't have to play with their own playbook to call them the way they are terrorists. Just let us call them terrorists. But calling them jihadis, because they are very proud to be called jihadis, means that they are fighting for the religion. And in doing so, you help them even to oppose the other Muslims. And the majority, the vast majority of Muslims. And these terrorists are killing more Muslims than even Christians. So I think we have to be sure, even in terms of the terminology that we use, that we are, so I was to say that we have this group, you know, when we built the G5 Sahel, 5 terrorist organizations also joined to create this organization. So as you are organizing to come to fight us, we are just trying to get united. So it means that there is quite of unity that is being created among the groups now. We have this, it was the former Ansar Din movement led by Iyad Agari, which is leading this group. And the second, which we have also elements of what they call the Islamic State also. This also is a problem. They are not Islamic, they are not a state. So I think we don't need to. So these groups are there. They don't fight each other, but they have maybe a common objective, and they evolve in this area. And one of the tactics that this group are using, which is quite of concern to all of us, I think you need to help us to better understand what is happening, because in Mali and in other countries, we are seeing more and more confrontation between communities, between the Fulani community, the Dogon, the Bambaras, the Songais, and the rest. But these people have been living together from the Middle Ages in the good intelligence. But the plans for the terrorist organization is that, they want to bring us into a major, as well as they try to oppose Western world and the Muslim world, they are trying also to oppose our community, so we go into the major confrontation between different ethnic groups and communities in the country. This is what is happening mainly in what we call the center of Mali, where we have seen in the past for many years, in many of our countries, in Mali, in Mauritania, and elsewhere, within countries and in the border areas, we used to see confrontation between herders, cattle raisers, and farmers on the other side about grazing areas, about lands, and the rest. These have been there. These are traditional conflicts which have been also managed. But today, we are trying to say, there is a Fulani problem in Mali, like the Malian people hate the Fulanis. Myself, I'm from the Fulani tribe. There is no such a Fulani issue. The problem that we have is that this Amadou Koufa, who is a terrorist linked to Iyad Agari, who is leading the Katiba. Katiba, the terrorists, they divide territories into different Katibas, and each head of the terrorist organization have the authority over this land. So he is Amadou Koufa, who is from the Fulani tribe, is the one leading the terrorist group in the Massina. So his organization is called Front de Libération du Massina. He's a front to liberate Massina. Massina is an old kingdom in the central part of Mali led by the Fulanis. So he's trying to bring back this part of the history and to oppose the Fulani community to the rest of the community. Well, on the same land that don't have only Fulanis. We have different other communities living in this area. So now, given that Amadou Koufa is from the Fulani community, so if attacks occur, of course, most of the attacks are led by his own people from the Fulani tribe. So this is not to say we don't have to make the confusion that all Fulanis are terrorists. But many terrorists in the Amadou Koufa group are from the Fulani community. And people know each other. When there are attacks in the communities to attack the villages, to kill people, to organize terrorist attacks, so sometimes the reaction from the other groups of a community is to retaliate against not even the terrorists that they don't see, but against the ordinary Fulani community, which is not normal. But this is exactly what the terrorists want to. I want to expand on this because it's not understood what is happening if there is a national agenda to fight this group, but we have to be very careful. Even we as a government, as a people, we need to continue to promote dialogue between the community, to promote tolerance, to allow people to talk to each other, to go to talk to our young people, to have the program for de-radicalization of it. We have to provide the political solution. We need to make sure also the government and the state, because in many of the area in the center, Mopti, what is happening, this group come, they attack all the symbol of the state. Mayor, governors, prefect, and the rest. Teachers, they don't want to teach the Western education. They attack the judges because they say you don't have to apply the modern law, you just have to apply the Sharia law. So most of the time after the attacks, all the representatives of state have to leave the area because of the insecurity. And then the population are left alone. And when these people come, they try to establish their own rule, they try to teach their own education. So For me, the challenge is how to make sure that the government is coming back to reoccupy the space to make sure that we are not leaving the population in the hands of these people. Because the population have to cooperate for their own life or sometimes for many other reasons. I think that is one of the critical elements that we are having today in Mali to ensure we have put in place what they call a special program, integrated program for the securization of the Central Delta region. It's a multidimensional program established by the government for the regions in the center which are facing this insurgency. It's not a military response. It's a multidimensional, including security and military response, bringing back the state institutions, bringing back the social services with a clear component for the transitional and modern justice, as well as enough provision for dialogue with the specific space for women, youth organizations, civil society, because what we are trying to resolve cannot be resolved by military means. And also our own military have to be very careful during these operations, because the way these operations are conducted, we are in what we call asymmetric war. Of course, our military need to be better prepared to do this, but even military from modern countries, the US and the rest, in similar situations, have been having many challenges, because you are working in an environment where you don't know your enemy. It's not a conventional war. The enemy can be your neighbor, your friend, your wife. You are helping civilians. The following minute, you will discover that they have a bomb to explode themselves. So they're evolving in under very stressful condition. But they have to be careful to respect the human right, to make sure that the populations in this area are confident that our police, gendarmerie, and the military are there to help and protect the population. That, I think, is a critical element. And the government is making also sure that those who are committed crime, even from the army, are also accountable. Because, you know, it's not just to satisfy human rights groups, Berit and some of the activists for the human. No, it's not to please the Western. It's just smart. Because if we don't proceed that way, we are giving the means for the terrorists to even recruit more people. Because most of the people who join this organization feel that they have been not well treated, that the army came in the area, they kill people, they have to retaliate. And so we have to be very careful in the way we address it. Let us not give them reason to push our young people in their hands because they don't trust the government, the state institution, and the apparatus. I think this is, and we need your help, because all this need also to build capacity. It needs training. It needs that we have to make all the materials at the disposal of our troops to be able to operate. We need to also invest more in the intelligence, in the human intelligence, because you cannot send a battalion of 1,000 people in the village, but they will not have any impact. But you need to have sound intelligence. You need to understand how these people operate, what they are doing, who are they talking to, what are they thinking of doing. And to have also special units who are well prepared to confront them. So I think the type of war has completely changed. So if our armies, we don't change our modus operandi, we need as much as possible to organize as our armies the way terrorist cells are organized. Because they are not big battalion. They have maybe small group, 2 or 3 people. They come, they send a bomb here, they disappear. And sometimes they live in the village. They have complices in the community. So let us also think in a way that we ourselves, we can be doing the same. In the villages, when people want to cooperate, how many time I have left?
Approximately 5 to 10 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. Let me fast forward.
Or let's say 10 minutes.
10 minutes, that's fine. So I have to make sure that I have all my messages across. But this was, I took more time because this is complex and not many people understand what is going on in the central part of Mali, which also is happening in the northern part of Burkina, I think in the Niger area we have Boko Haram and the rest. But more and more the tactics of this group is to make sure there are confrontation among the communities. And when we have the last 3 weeks or so, or last month in Mali, because of these inter-community clashes, we lost about 100 people just in 2-3 weeks because of the confrontation between the communities, not coming from the terrorists. I think this is quite worrisome. We have to be very careful. And also sometimes the way also we are fighting terrorists can increase, because we know we organize some operation from the French troops, allied with some local Malian armed groups, to fight against some of these groups, which in return have created the retaliations against some of the communities who are supposed to be cooperating with the French army or the Malian army. So I think we are in a very complex situation on that level. I will just to skip some of the elements, maybe we may come in terms of the questions. As per globally, the security situation is the number of attacks have globally gone down, but at the same time we have seen more complex terrorist operation being organized, combined with the inter-community clashes. It is within this context that the government of Mali have also adopted a strategy for the de-radicalization, because we need also to continue to invest in the soft ways to address this issue. The peace process have seen, of course, we have gone through significant delays in the implementation of the peace accord. Personally, I have been one of the negotiators of the peace agreement. I think in Mali there is no alternative to peace, and there is no alternative to the peace agreement. The peace agreement is not perfect, but is only tool, framework that we have today to engage Malian and the former armed groups, our brothers and sisters from the north, for a lasting peace. Of course, we lost 2-3 years because of some of the delaying tactics, administrative delays, and the rest. We lost a lot of time. Now we are heading to presidential election in June 29. The key issues have not been resolved, but recently the confidence is starting to be built again among the actors. UN Security Council have pressure and put in place a sanction regime, which also is helping in forcing all the parties to go toward implementation of the agreement. And now the challenge is to make sure that all armed groups are cooperating through the joint patrols, because they have a mechanism, security mechanism, as per the accord, to have joint patrols involving Malian army, but also the former rebel groups, to ensure minimal security. And we agreed also to establish interim authorities, which are the mayors and the rest, which are not elected so far, but they are just nominated by consensus between the government and armed group, before we could organize local and regional election to have democratic elected bodies. Meanwhile, I think the confidence is being built among the party and their commitment to make sure, even from the armed group, that they will be cooperating to organize the presidential elections in July 29th. Of course, with the security landscape that I described previously, one could wonder if we will be in the position to organize the election in July 29. Of course, the situation is difficult. Of course, it will not be easy. Probably we might not be able to organize election in 100% of all the localities in Mali. But if we don't organize the election, what is the option? I think we have to go ahead. The government have decided to go forward, to have the election organized, to beef up the security and the political measure to ensure the minimum security, and to make sure we could organize election, which means also meets the international standards for transparent and credible election. We need the support of all our partners to make this happen, so that we have a legitimate authority which can continue to handle and tackle the security issues, as well as the development issues. Let me come to conclusion. Conclusion on both development and security, so we can have more time for the discussion. I think with this landscape on the security, I think we are clear that what happened in the Sahel has considerably undermined the development effort and also have disrupted the fragile governance system in many countries in West Africa, in the Sahel. What Sahel need is to engage in a structural transformation effort, which can focus also on using the renewable energy in particular, but also looking at agriculture sector, which is the only sector in our country which occupies 70% of the population, where if there is an economic growth, it can be an inclusive one because it will affect the maximum of our population. So if you have 60% of our population under the age of 25, and then we want to have an economic growth which is sustainable, but also which can absorb these young people, I think definitely agriculture should be one of the key strategic. Agriculture and rural economy should be one of the key areas where we can invest to raise the productivity level, but also to expand the development and the growth potential of our country. We need also to work in a way to reduce the excessive dependence on export commodity, and the economy need to be then of the Sahel need to be diversified for them to be more resilient and more competitive. Sahel countries need to create a conducive environment for private sector development because we don't have to rely only on aid. We have to create the amount of jobs that we want to create. The government will not be able to do that. We need to bring in investors, entrepreneurs. We need also to transform our young people into entrepreneurs for their own country, and we need to bring in the private sector, enhance the financial sector, including the women entrepreneurship, because in addition to the young people, who represent 60%, women represent in many of our countries more than 55% of the population. So it's just not fairness. It's just also to be smart. Because when we have the women empowerment, we empower also men, because the women give birth to men as well. So the effect is quite important. So we need to have greater investment in social development, including health, education, water, better employment, which is critical also for peace and stability. Investing in the social sector is an investment in peace and stability, because it's with that you will not need to make all this expenditure in the militarization of the region. Because if our young people are occupied, we will not need to have a soldier to come and fight the group. So investment should also be increased in the secondary and medium-sized disadvantaged cities to enable them to become growth pole, to create real economic opportunity for young people and to relieve pressure on the principal large cities. So I want to elaborate a bit on that, because the problem we have, maybe not in Europe you have it, in many of our countries we have just major mega cities which are the capital cities, like Bamako in Mali. When you get out of Bamako, you're already almost in the bush. There is no, you have people, because the major capitals are exercising a big pooling attraction for people to come from the rural area. It means that people are not practicing agriculture. They come in the city, and then urbanization, which is not well organized, become a problem. And between the rural areas and the capital city, you don't have these medium-sized cities. If they were developed, maybe we could keep our young people to stay, and this can also be buffer zones between mega cities and the rural areas, so we can also try to decrease a bit the pressure of all the young people to come in the major cities. That's, I think, in the Sahel also, let us look at to make sure that we have these small and medium-sized cities which we can better manage, which also can be centers to promote economic development. I cannot stop before saying that as a region where we see challenges are driven by climate change, I think the solar energy should be solar and the renewable energy, the investing in those one could be the key. because the only thing which is not missing in the Sahel is the sun. So help us with the research to get the cost down, how we can increase the access to electricity. Because one of the reasons why it will be difficult for us to get our young people to remain in the rural areas. You know, the young people today, they want to be on the internet, they want to be on Facebook, they want to connect to the world. There is no way you can ask our young people to remain in the dark in the villages. So if we want them to remain what they are, including what we are trying to resolve with the migration issue, if you want them to stay, create what they are looking for elsewhere. If our young people could be in the village, in the farm, they have internet, they have electricity, they have solar, they have, you know, in my view, I don't think our young people who are coming to Europe really want to come. Maybe if 10%, a tiny part of it. But all the decent persons want to stay and live in their own country if left with options. So I talk to our European friends. You know, some of them want us to take our people who are illegal, to bring them home. They want to give them $2,000 to go in the country. I tell them, to be frank, no one will go home with the $2,000. It's not even 1 month's salary. If you want people to go, create conditions for them. When I'm back, can go in the farm, I have roads, I have all these things. But, you know, if you just give $2,000, the day they land in Bamako, they will take again the road to go to the north. Because, you know, when people leave, they are very proud people, most of these people. They left their communities because of the poverty, because they have families that they want to sustain. They will never accept to come poorer than when they left. Why people will just risk their life to go to the sea? Of course, we have our own responsibility as the African government. These people, when they are leaving, it's a failure for us. It's a failure. And then we need to find a way to resolve this problem. So now, let me look at the response to the main question which I didn't respond, which is the balance between the military and the development. I said more in few words what we should be doing in terms of development. Now, we need to have, over time, a decrease in the military footprint in the region, both from our partners as well as from our national governments. But before saying that, we have to make sure that every country needs an army, a police, and security forces. Because when we are attacked by the terrorists, the first response will still be that force. So don't fool ourselves to think that we don't need these people, that with the soft measure we can. No. You need the security, but this is just a short and medium-term response. If you don't add on long-term responses, you will fail. But let us have our countries to build their own local, national, and regional capacities to respond, to better train our people, to better equip them, to be in the position ourselves to ensure the security of our countries. The figures that I gave you about all these external forces, of course, they might be useful at times to solve problem on the shorter term, but on the longer run, it's better to empower the Malians, the Nigerian, the Burkinabe, the G5 Sahel to do the work. Maybe it will be cheaper. Also, what we are trying to fight, the terrorists, it will not be 1 or 2 year fight. It will be a long haul. If it's a long haul, are you ready to stay in this country for that long? If you stay, what are the implications? So it's better we have the national armies, the populations, because if a Malian soldier or Nigerian come in, it's much easier to work with the population than if you have an external force. We have UN and the rest. They are doing an excellent job, but I think we need to invest more in building the capacities of the country. When we are making this investment to sending our troops from the Western countries, let us make sure to ask always our question, are we helping to build the local capacity to take over? And what is the agenda for that to happen? So we need also to invest in the soft measure as we are decreasing the military footprint, which is mainly to look at the conflict prevention, conflict prevention represent 10%, even less, of any military solution. But are we thinking of investing in this? Sometimes we wait to have a conflict to start thinking about the prevention. So the prevention, including governance, dialogue, reconciliation, all these are things that we have at hand that we can do much cheaper than investing in the military. We need also, as a way to ensure the peacekeeping, to make sure that we are going into a new generation of peace support operations. I talked about MINUSMA. They are doing a great job as a UN mission. But the challenge we are facing is that MINUSMA, according to the UN own numbers, they are using 70% of the personnel to protect themselves. So this lead us to ask ourselves the question, are they relevant to the threat? They are doing a great job. We have many of our neighboring countries' soldiers. Norway and many European countries are involved in the MINUSMA. I respect them. They're sacrificing themselves for our security. But what I'm trying to say is to make sure that our operations, military support operations, are relevant. UN missions and the peacekeeping mission are designed from the Cold War or even beyond at the creation of the United Nations was to tackle the conventional conflict between two countries, two states. Today, peacekeeping operations are in environment, what I describe is an asymmetric war environment. So they don't have the mandate and they are not equipped to do this work. So for the UN to succeed, we need a new, different type of compact between the UN, the African Union, G5 Sahel, and the forces on the ground who are willing and ready to tackle the asymmetric threat. If we had an African missions embedded within the UN mission with a different mandate and the ability to confront this terrorist group, it will be a different scenario. Because today the UN mission does not have all the necessary tool and the mandate to do an asymmetric war. And the UN has also a doctrinal problem. Because for the UN, they have a doctrine. The doctrine is peacekeeping, but we are trying to keep peace in many areas where there is almost no peace to be kept. It means that we have a problem. We have a problem. So I think we have to go into new generation or compact. Zero is what? I have 0 minutes? Yeah. Okay, okay, good, good, good. So I touch on all these things about job creation. So I think I even have given my conclusion before reaching the conclusion, which was mainly to decrease the military footprint and to have greater investment in soft measure, greater investment in the socio-economic development. So I just stop when you say 0. I can sit? You can.
Yes, please. Come and sit here with me. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for sharing your knowledge and views with us. This was very interesting, and I'm sure there are lots of questions to be asked and comments to be made. But before I open up the floor to you, I will invite my good colleague Morten Bøås, research professor at NUPI, to give some comments to the ambassador's talk.
I'm sorry for the length of my stay.
No, no, it was very interesting. We are here because you are here, you know, so this was great. And just to say a few words about Morten, many of you probably know him, but he works primarily on issues concerning peace and conflict in Africa, including issues such as land rights, citizenship conflicts, ex-combatants, and the new landscape of insurgencies and geopolitics. Morten has written a number of books and articles on these topics, and he has conducted in-depth fieldwork in a number of African countries. So, Morten, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks to my friend, the ambassador, and thanks to everybody who has come here this morning on a Thursday in Oslo that is much more sunny than it used to that normally is in May. So I'm very happy for that, and I'll be brief because you probably are more interested in asking questions to the ambassador than listening to me. But I just wanted to try to flesh out a few points that I from the speech that I think was particularly interesting and makes a few comments on them. I'm not going to take much time. If I start with your point concerning the militarization of the Sahel, I mean, I think we are very much in agreement here. I mean, you fleshed out that the G5 Sahel countries are currently spending around 6 to 7% of their GDP on military spending. It should be absolutely clear that this is not sustainable. It is not sustainable, simply. They cannot keep up that high level of military spending. And part of the problem, as I see it, is that in many ways they have been pushed into doing this by particularly European partners. European partners who basically panicked in 2014, 2015 due to what was then coined as the European refugee crisis, which to me is completely stupid in many ways. I mean, Europe had a problem dealing with refugees, but the refugee crisis, which is very real, and it exists, but it doesn't exist in Europe. But it do exist in the Sahel and a number of other places. And whereas what Europe is doing now may have given Europe a breather, this is not sustainable in the long run. And this could very easily backfire and have devastating consequences for the Sahel, but in fact also for Europe. And we need to realize that the current approach is simply not sustainable. So it's neither in the interest of the people who live in this area, nor for Europe to continue down this narrow military security road. This does not at all mean, and here we are very much in agreement, one needs a military approach to some of these groups that are the insurgent groups that are operating in Sahel. I'm not naive about that at all. I spent a lot of my career studying these kind of groups, so I have no doubt about that. You need a military approach to something like the Al-Murabitun, Akim, Ansar, and so on. You need that, but you need to do it in a way that is sustainable. And the current approach is simply not sustainable, and we need to discuss that. What is needed, in my point of view, is that, which you also rightly point out, that this is not something that is going to be over in a year or two. This is something that's going to, unfortunately, go on for a long time. And that also means that both local, national, and external stakeholders need a long-term perspective about how to combine resources in a meaningful way, both to the military, to the security, but also to development and to state building. So a long-term perspective is needed, but still an operation like MINUSMA needs an idea about a clear exit strategy. Otherwise, I'm afraid that MINUSMA could end up like MONUSCO in the Congo, just something that goes on year after year after year, keeping a country on some sort of artificial international life support system, preventing a collapse, but not taking it out of the current crisis either. And we need to avoid that we create another MONUSCO in Mali and the Sahel. The G5 Sahel. I see, like you, I see opportunities here. But I'm also afraid that the G5 Sahel will be dragged into this narrow security approach by external actors and external donors. Because right now it seems to me, based on the recent meetings, that there is what Europe is mostly interested in here is not the broader developmental agenda of the Sahel, but the narrow aspect of getting boots on the ground. And boots on the ground are needed, but boots on the ground in isolation is not going to solve the problems that we are faced with here. Secondly, I mean, the G5 Sahel is promising because it could give the region something that it has never had before, and that is a real working regional arrangement. But then we need to realize that institutional support beyond the military is absolutely necessary. And that is institutional support not only to the G5 Secretariat as such, but also to the national bureaucracies that are going to deal with this, because we have to remember that no regional arrangement can become stronger than the combined sum of the member states. So this means that if the G5 Sahel is to work, you need to support not only the G5 Secretariat, but also institutional support to the various member states to deal with G5 Sahel issues. Otherwise, it's simply not going to work. Then the only thing we then create is an isolated center of excellence without any real attachment to national governments. And then it will be completely meaningless. Thirdly, and you asked about this, and I saw this as a challenge perhaps to me and others here in this room, how do we define these people in Ansar, in Akim, Jenim, and so on? I believe that, and I agree with your point, that we should probably stop, at least limit the use of the term jihadi or jihadist. Personally, I'm not so keen on sort of just putting the terrorist label on them either. I acknowledge that groups like Ansar and Jenim, Akim, and so on, that they do conduct acts of terrorism. But I'm a little afraid that if you just stamp all of them as terrorists, we are also closing the door or making the pathway back to reintegration, at least for the foot soldiers there, much more difficult. And I would like very much, and we have discussed this between us, that we need to keep that door open. Yes, there are people here that you need to target. There are people, if they are captured, who needs to face courts and so on, and probably should be sentenced and so on. But there's a lot of people here who's moving in and out of these movements, and not all of them are necessarily radicalized to the core. There is a small radical core to this group, but most of these people, if they are radicalized at all, it's more as a situational pose than that they are actually utterly convinced of this. Something people are doing for different reasons, very often because there isn't anything else to do, and this becomes an opportunity. So I think maybe we should just call them insurgents, because I mean they are not simply bandits; they are involved in acts of banditry, but there is also some sort of political, religious agenda here that, whether we like it or not, needs to take seriously, and we need to deal with it. So that would be my answer to this. And of course, as you pointed out, and I'll end with this, we need to become much better at understanding their strategies. And particularly, as you pointed out, their strategies in a place like the inner delta of the central region of Mopti, where they have been very sort of skillfully have played both emerging but also existing cleavages between different groups. That is what they have been good at, and they have been very good at playing on not the tribal card. I see that some people talk about this as a crisis of tribalism, that there is sort of that these kind of movements thrive in areas of tribal areas of tribalism. I think that is completely a wrong way of seeing this. But what is happening in this area is it's a livelihood crisis, and it's a crisis of pastoralism, which these groups has been very skillfully have been able to use to their advantage. That is their strength, but we also need to realize, and I think we need to realize this better, that this is also their weakness. Because the way that they use this as some sort of ethnic manipulation also means that there are limits to how strong they actually can become. Because what Hamadou Koufa is trying to do is basically to juggle things that doesn't go very well together. And that is his strength, but it's also the limitations to his movement. And we should not sort of make these insurgents stronger than they are. They are really not that strong. The problem is that we have problems dealing with them because we don't understand them too well. And their strength is more the relatively long-term absence of a working state in this area. So we need to bring the state back, but what we need to bring back is a state that actually works and can prove that it can deliver better than these people can. And that is the challenge that we are faced with. I'll stop here, but I'm certain that there are a lot of questions here, and they should mainly be directed to the ambassador and not to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Now it's your turn. Could I ask you to please stand up and say your name and institutional affiliation, if you have one, before you ask your question or post your comment. We have a microphone here, so please. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Ole Halvorsen. I'm studying Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Oslo. My question is regarding all these international actors, because with so many actors, there must be difficult for the governments to handle the priorities, because these actors have different priorities. Although they have some common priorities, they also have different priorities. For instance, while France may be more focused on counterterrorism, the EU is increasingly focused on migration. So, for instance, in Niger, they've pushed for the criminalization of migrant smuggling, and also working with Mali, in Gao, Kidal. And what I'm concerned with is that the EU, that's more of a domestic concern in the EU, migration. So they're domesticating their foreign policy in the Sahel to some extent, it seems like, by pushing for these types of policies and actions in Niger, in Mali. And the problem here, as I see it, is that that might not be such a big priority for the governments themselves. And the EU is focusing a lot on the supply side of migration, on stopping the smugglers, putting them in jail. But by doing this, I fear that it will perhaps even create more instability, because the demand will always be there. So smugglers may take new routes, more dangerous routes, and it may actually be beneficial for terrorist groups in the region. So I was wondering what you think about that situation and the priorities of the actors.
Thank you so much. I think we will take a few more, if that's okay with you. Okay, I think, was it you there? Yeah, please, and then, yeah. Okay.
My name is Christine. I'm working as independent consultant with social entrepreneurship. And as I know, the MAPD region and the Sahel region, one of the positive assets is the huge amount of social moments. And in Koro and in the Masina Delta, I'm just wondering which role could Tabital Pulaco and the Dagan Association play to be a counterpower, in fact, in between the clashes between the different groups. And what is the difference between Amadou Koufa's Tenenko Yuvore-based insurgency and the Koro-based insurgency? It's not quite clear to me. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much. I see there are many questions here. I think let's take one more on this side, and then I'll move to you afterwards, please. Was it you? Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Geir Tonsdal. I work for the Strømme Foundation, or the Strømme Stiftelsen, som det heter på norsk. Thank you, Ambassador, for the presentation. I just had a question. You mentioned the youth bulge that is emerging, not only in Mali, but across the Sahel or the Africa region in general. And we know that a lot of youth these days, they graduate into unemployment, and we know that practically 75% of youth in these countries end up in the informal economy in some way. I was just wondering, to what extent are policy solutions discussed at the level of the G5 for finding policy options for creating jobs for youth and diversifying economies to create the types of opportunities that will allow youth not to be recruited to extremism, but in gainful employment? I was just curious to hear, I know there are national commitments, but at what level is this also being discussed sub-regionally? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have a handful of questions now, so please, maybe you can answer them, and then we'll take them around afterwards. You can, yeah, you can. Okay, yeah, it's up to you. Or you can sit there. Oh, what do you?
Just stand is
Yeah.
fine. So just stand is better. Yeah, no, for the first question from Mula, I think the different priority from different actors. I think what is important is first for each country and the region to be clear about what we want. I think we have to define very clearly what are our priorities, what are the strategies to address these challenges, and to be also in the position to say no, which many governments in the region don't do. I think if we have the sentiment that what partners are offering is not in line with what we want, we need to have the courage to say no. So I would advise the government, when time comes and we think that partners are not willing to listen, we just also have to say no, because it's not helpful. I was telling to my friends, not all the helps are helpful. And some can create bigger problem than the problem we are trying to resolve. You talked about what France does and what also the EU does. I think for our friend from the EU, I know the migration is a big issue for them. But I think so far there is some misunderstanding, because I think for most EU countries, the migration issue are pushed by the quest from far right and right policies in many of these countries about how we should be treating migrants, and because many moderate governments are losing grounds and they need to show muscle that they are solving the problem, which in my view, of course, they're politicians. It's always good to do something about a problem. But when we are talking to partners, let us make sure we have a comprehensive understanding of the problem. Because even though as for the Valletta Agreement and the rest, the declaration, we are saying, let us look at this comprehensively. Because the solution I have provided regarding the development, I think those, if we address them correctly, maybe we will not have to do the policing, because most of the EU policy, if you go beyond the rhetoric, there is an overemphasis on the security measure to address the migration issues. How can we stop people from coming? So how can we stop people from even leaving their countries? I think there is also there, I think that the security, over-reliance on the security measure to handle migration have even created a much bigger problem, because, you know, many of them, we are seeing a mass migration. We are seeing that many migrants are going underground in many countries, which have exposed them to slavery in Libya, to human rights abuses. And also we are telling people, you need to have a comprehensive approach. If you want to fight irregular migration, open up ways for normal migration, for mobility. You have business people, you have students, you have many types of groups who are not willing to come to settle here. But even in France and the rest, why we have this problem of the migrants? It's happened when, with the Front National and the rest, they start putting coercive measures on the migrants, because in the past, 30, 40 years ago, what people were doing, okay, I leave the village, I go to France, I work, because I'm from a region in Mali, a Kari region where most migrants are coming from. People use it was generation from generation. If I go, I spend 20 years, I work in France, and then I can come back. When I am trying to get older, I allow my younger brother to go and to work. Problems start getting complicated when we start building walls. So those who are willing to go back had no choice than to stay, because normally they didn't have even family, they were single. Now they have to marry, they have to try to bring the wife, to make children, to stay in. And the number have been growing up from inside. And the irregular migration have also been increasing. I think when we are trying to address this, let us look at the mobility, let us look at also the permanent solution. How we can provide solution to these young people. That's why I'm saying most of the program we are trying to put in place to keep people in the way. But the resources is quite radical. I don't think that you can imagine that you will want to keep people with it. You need to have significant programs which really give serious option to people not to go. So I think Europe should have really a more balanced approach, not only in words, but to have to make sure, of course, we need to fight irregular migration and the rest. But if this is the only measure you are providing and you are not providing the other tools where people have options. So if I'm in the northern part of Mali, I'm a young person. If the only options for me is either to leave my country or to go to give my services to the terrorist and criminal organization, what else? But what are the other choices? Do I have the bank to help me to get a loan, to establish, to do my business? Do I have the road? Do I have a governance system to help me to be a member of my community? And to so I think these are the answers that we need to have in the dialogue with our friends. But if you look at today, the amount that even Frontex is spending in Libya to stop people with military means, if you look at the amount each of your country is spending to even get irregular migrant from here to his country, it's much more than anything we can give to the migrant himself. Maybe willingly, he will want to go in his community to do something. So I think we need to probably change the gear and go toward that kind of measure. Regarding the role of organization like Tabital Pulaku, I'm not sure if everybody knows what is Tabital Pulaku. Tabital Pulaku is a main organization in the region. It's a cultural organization from the Fulani community. It's not only for Mali, because Fulanis are in many countries. They are in Burkina, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Guinea, in Mali, in Niger, up to Cameroon. So it's a big organization. But for the Mali case in particular, given that the situation in Mopti region is mainly caused by or involve the Fulani community, of course they have a role. They made a very tough statement recently from this organization regarding the way the Fulanis are being treated. I think if we want to keep the ways of the dialogue open, these are the organizations we should be talking to, because they are listened to. They have involvement. I know many of our leaders from the parliament who have been members of the government or who have occupied a significant role in their community. They can play a constructive role, and the government needs to rely on all the positive forces within those communities who can talk to these people, who can facilitate dialogue, who can also make a recommendation to the government about some of the actions that are being undertaken in the region. Your second question about Koro and the Amadunku, I'm not sure I got it very correctly. I don't see much even the difference about. I know Koro, we had clashes between the Fulani community and the Dogon, who are hunters. I don't know exactly what are the links between those insurgents and Amadun Kufa. Some of the time it's just confrontation between civilians. Because sometimes people retaliate against ordinary civilians thinking that they are terrorists. Sometimes they don't even have evidence that those people are terrorists, because, you know, there are suspicions, and I was in the road, someone from this community or looked like him attacked me, and I think, so I think it's mostly, or he came from your village, so I think there is too much suspicion. I think that's why I think it's better we bring in the state, because the absence of the government and the state institution have also allowed even people to do justice for themselves. We are seeing more and more militias, self-defense group, and the rest. It's not the way we should be taking. I think we cannot privatize the security setup in a country. I think the state has to be there, and the state has to play the role, and the justice has to be there for every citizen in the country. Now, the G5 solution for the youth. Maybe I didn't have a chance to discuss a bit in my presentation the G5 itself. Of course, people heard about G5 most of the time when we established the G5 Sahel Joint Force. But the G5 Sahel as an organization was established on two pillars. One is development, one is security, and the two should be combined. You're right, definitely. The response of many of the partners is going toward the military element of the G5. But the G5 have what they call program prioritaire d'investissement, is the investment priority program for the G5 Sahel country over 5 years, and with an estimate of the resources that are needed to tackle development and governance issues, focusing mainly on the fragile area trans-boundary. Because G5 is trying to put more emphasis on area where the government, state institutions are not well represented, but in the crossroads between different countries. And I think they are planning this year a major donor conference in Brussels. We hope it will generate attention, but it's not getting the support that is needed. More emphasis is more people who hear about G5, they hear about the force, but not on the development. Of course, the force is here to start to respond to this threat, but definitely, if we help the countries to have this program, it means that we will have infrastructures between the countries, we will have more mobility in the country, we will have more investment for our young people, because we need to invest to create opportunities for the Sahelian young people so they can stay in their country and they can be dynamic force for the development of our country. Yeah, you should help us also to look into the development component of the G5 and how we can get our partners, because many partners, when we talk to them, they say, okay, they want the force, but the development, you know, they are already investing in those countries. There is no need to have a new program to address the Sahel issues. For the G5, what is important is to make sure that the G5 Sahel development component is not duplicating any development effort in countries. So the niche for the G5 is to tackle the fragile area between countries at the borders. So they shouldn't be, but we have really discussion with our partners, and the understanding so far is quite difficult. And we have also a multiplication of initiative even on development, because we have the G5 Sahel investment plan, we have the Alliance with or for the Sahel, which is led by France and many other partners. You have Club du Sahel. So today you have UN, UNIS, this is UN support for the Sahel. So, and in addition to all the bilateral, everyone has his own strategy on the Sahel. So I think now the Sahel sky is quite overcrowded. With those initiatives, we need to make sure that we can make sure that the only way to coordinate this initiative is to look at what countries and what the region wants. So you may not even need to make a strategy then. So if the country vision is clear, then you have to see in that vision what can you contribute to. But if everybody has its own strategy, the cost of transaction is very high for our countries. We have limited administration, we don't have enough people. If I'm sitting in Mali in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, just to understand the difference, the Sahel strategy is a problem for me. Yeah, we will just stop there and take additional questions.
Thank you so much. Are you okay, Morten, that we open up again for questions, and then you can come in afterwards? Yes, so then we have the gentleman here.
No, it's fine. Yeah, I can stand. Fine, thank you.
Hi, my name is Osland. I work for the health section of NORAD, which is the Norwegian state development agency. And I'm probably going to be rather stupid and shoot myself in the foot now. But so from what I understood of your argument, I understand the notion of localizing and reducing the military footprint and trying to make the military response more intelligent and more adapted. But you kind of counter that with the notion of bringing the state back into these areas and resurrecting services. As if that was very easy. The problem was the state was there before. You had governors, you had mayors, because you say they left, so they had to have been there. And you had courts. And Morten said at the end, you just need to bring the state back in, you may need more of it, you need it better. And my question to you a little bit was, in thinking about realistic strategies of, so first of all, was and is the state legitimate to these people? You keep referring to the insurgents and as terrorists, which, and I kind of agree with Morten that the word jihadist maybe puffs them up, but terrorist is used by a lot of states to exclude. Is there a sense amongst ordinary people, not within the movements, that the justice systems that existed beforehand were both accessible but also fair, so that the rulings were equivalent for everyone and didn't preference certain people? Were health systems and educational systems providing good enough care that was accessible? Because if not, I mean, if they were, why did they go to war? But if not, how easy is it going to be able to not just reestablish the systems of before, but to make them sufficiently compelling that people start to become members of the national polity and to want to fight for their country and not for their small group? I am particularly talk about the legitimacy because, having worked in other countries, there's often a problem with the institutions of state and pastoral people. They don't recognize the state as reflecting their institutions. So it's both about how really realistic is a socio-economic development-driven response to the crisis, both legitimate but also feasible as an alternative to military.
Thank you. A big question. Are you okay with a few more?
I'm fine, yeah.
So the gentleman in the blue shirt behind there, I saw also. Yeah. You? Yeah, there are many blue shirts. But you have a blue shirt. No, it's you. You. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Tor Benjaminsen. I'm a professor at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. And Mali is very close to my heart. I've been following Mali since my first visit in 1987, doing research in Mali. I think the gentleman here asked a very good question that you should spend some time on. So I was going to ask something similar. But instead, I would like to ask you how you see the prospect for negotiations with the so-called jihadist groups.
Okay, so I think we can take you behind there, and then I'll take you as well. Both of you. So in the white T-shirt there. Oh, you didn't ask. Okay. Okay, behind. Berit. Okay, please.
Yes. Thank you so much for a very interesting and very comprehensive overview of the situation. And my name is Berit Lindemann. I live currently in Bamako. And you have also described the very complexity of the situation, and you cannot solve one problem without actually increasing a different problem. Now, and you have also underlined a few times the role of government and the responsibility of these countries to also solve their own problems. It's not only the international community coming and solving the problem, but it's also for the countries themselves and the governments to really step up and to take their own responsibility. And if we return to Mali and the country where you were part of the government, which you are no longer, I can ask you a question, which is maybe not so touchy anymore.
Okay.
Because Keita had a lot of support when he won the elections, the president of Mali. There were great hopes. He had support from the international community, he had a lot of support inside of the country. Now, that support has decreased to almost nothing. I mean, it's dissolved. The local community does not support him anymore. The international community is very frustrated. And now we have elections in a very, very volatile situation this summer. Well, that was descriptive. So I would ask you if you should give 3 points of recommendation for the new government, taking into account what didn't work the previous period, no matter whether it will be Keita continuing or a different, possibly different president. What would be the 3 main priorities to give to the new government, especially in establishing governance in the parts of the country where there's none, and also increasing the credibility in the rest of the country to avoid the conflict spreading even more to the rest of the country.
Thank you very much. I see there are a number of you other people who want to ask questions, but we will let you answer now and then come back to you.
Yeah.
Okay?
I can start? Yes. Yeah. I was still thinking about Barry's question. So, no, from our friend from NORAD, I think. NORAD, right? Maybe I didn't have time to emphasize enough the governance issues. In many of our countries, we have a crisis of the state. Which type of state do you want for our country? Some are talking about strong state, and some are talking about weak state. Some want to be even to be independent, and all. What is important, and what we are trying to realize in the Mali-specific case, because we are not trying to just bring the state back. You know, I was part of this negotiation. I heard a lot of different groups, their perspective about the state, the government, the way they interact with the government, the representation of the government in the state. So one of the key components of the agreement, the peace agreement, was to look at this governance system in the region. And we know in many parts of Mali, not only in the north, people want a governance system which is closer to their need. They want to have responsibility. They want to participate in that. So some have requested to have a federation or whatever. So I will not put appreciation on that. But the compromise for us was to have what we call a regionalization. It means that we'll give more powers to the regions. And in the end, we agree that the government will focus only on its sovereignty area, meaning the diplomacy, the currencies, some number of justice, the financial policies, and the rest. But at least 80% of the development issues will be devoted now to the new regions, which, because of the delay in the establishing the provision of the agreement, are not yet in place. We even went further because for the first time, the president of the region, because they will still have a governor who will be representing the state, but most of the power will be within the hand of the president of the region. And the president of the region will be, for the first time, elected. And the regional council will be in charge of the development and will even run some of the government agencies. It means that education, big part of the development will be there to make sure that the development, the regional matters are being handled, not from Bamako, but people want to feel that, at the regional level they have a say, they could contribute. So in my, I'm not saying it's a solution. It's up to every country to find a solution. Maybe in Niger, they are not doing this, but they have their own system in place. But in Mali, we thought we need to increase the devolution of power to the region and to decrease a bit the powers of the central state, which we have tried to do in the past. But what the problem we had is, first, we didn't provide all the human capacity to those new entities to be able, because they have to run their finances, they need the technical people, they need services. So we didn't transfer the human capacity at that level. And the second weakness have been the transfer in terms of the resources, because we established new communes with a lot of power, but they did not have any money. That's why we say from the 2018, the transfer to the municipalities should be at least 30% of the government budget, which we are not far from this target. And by 2018, we'll have 30% of the state budget to be, and this transfer should be effective, including the transfer of the services. I'm mindful that the governance is an issue. We don't have any silver bullet. Countries like yours spend maybe centuries to be where you are. I'm sure every country have to learn according to the experience of the people, the capacity, the social factors. So I think it's that. But there is a commitment on our side, on the Malian side, and there is a compromise among Malian that this should be the way to have a greater devolution of power. In the 90s, we have started the decentralization process to establish about 700 communes. So the regionalization will be a step forward. Maybe in 20 years, new generation will come with maybe a new type of devolution, but we are absolutely certain that Mali today cannot be handled in a centralized way that it has been handled in the past. And we need to question our states. But even when we give those powers, we need to also be mindful about some of the situation. Corruption is a problem. Even these new powers that we are establishing, you know, go in many of these areas in the north, the economy is a criminal economy. It means that if we are not careful, we will have the drug smuggler, the dealers, who will just take over those institutions and run them. Because all the money in these areas, those who will be elected, they are mainly these people who are in the money laundering system. So we have to be very careful as we are doing even the justice system. I'm not saying the Malian justice is perfect. There are many criticisms toward the justice. We even had some reports about the corruption cases and the rest, which have sent to justice, and the justice didn't do enough about it. Not that the government didn't want, but we have to make sure, because in Mali, it's hard to sanction a judge, because we couldn't change our constitution. Because when a judge, like it's for the doctors, they always have their own order. If a doctor made a mistake, they have to decide and sanction him. But for the judges in Mali, it's difficult. They have what they call Conseil Supérieur de la Magistrature. That is led by the president, and you have some judges themselves, and you have the, comment on dit les avocats, the lawyers. Huh? So when we start to sanction one judge, the two groups collide, just to say, to avoid any sanction. So I think this is not that there is not a will on the government, but unless we are also in a position, because the judges are independent, that's right, but they are citizens. So if they make mistakes also, they have to be sanctioned as well as any other citizen. So these are the problems that we are encountering in the country, and for that to change, you need to change the constitution. And in Mali, for 20 years, we failed. We had 3 attempts to change the constitution. We couldn't do it for reasons not linked to this. So just I agree with you, we have a crisis of states in many of our countries. Everybody is trying to find a solution, but definitely people want to have the decision as closer as possible to them. So it has to be inclusive. It has to take into account the diversity. Because in Mali, what we have also is a complication, is when we are negotiating the agreement, in many of your countries, the democratic rule. We said, okay, let's have elected bodies. In all the regions, you will have your own elected bodies. But you know, most of the main groups, the Iforas, which are Tuaregs grouped by a minority in the Kidal area, they have no interest in any democratic process on the ground, because when you organize elections, it's the Imghad and the other group who will win. Since the colonization, they have been the one dealing, having the deals with the French, having the deal with several Malian governments to be the one running this local. But they are a minority. And for them, we say, okay, we will put a region, the head of the region will be elected. But they have no interest, because they know they will not be able to win. They say, okay, can you find a way for us to just to keep our feudal power? So all these are problems. And then we say, okay, maybe we need to have some kind of maybe local senate, or have a group representative of different minority, which might not be elected, but maybe to copt people. It's very difficult. That's what I'm saying. Every country we need to find solution. Democracy does not apply everywhere to satisfaction, because the same reason which led to the rebellions, if you put a democratic system without having this kind of mix, and then you create. So my conclusion is these are processes countries and people have to get together, find a consensus, be creative, and start moving and improving those situations. Now, the negotiation with the, if they say negotiation with the jihadists, I don't like negotiating with the jihadists first, because I don't think that they have any political plans. I disagree with my friend here. But what I would say, you know, we have terrorists. We will need to continue to fight those terrorist organizations. Insurgent is different, probably. But we also know we have many of our young people who have been drawn in these extremist movements. Of course, we have to find a way to take them out of the hands of these people. We need to have dialogue, we need to talk to them, we need to have maybe political offers. We need to offer something. Otherwise, they will be kept in the hands of these people. But now to say, okay, those people who have been just there to kill people, they're accountable, they have to be tried to go before a judge and say, okay, let us come and sit down. Is there a space? We negotiated with the rebel movements. They have a political agenda. They want to something to negotiate. They accept the constitution of the country. So if we have to discuss even with our young people, they are the minimum that they need to accept, that you are in a country, you respect the constitution of that country, and you have minimal basic standards that they meet, and then we start discussing with them. Maybe they have issues. Maybe if they have governance issues, maybe if they have job issues, we can discuss with them. But just give a blank check that we should negotiate with every terrorist or jihadist group, I think we have to be more subtle than that. Of course, the principle of talking to, because if people are from my country, they could deviate for one or this region. But under conditions, we can discuss with those ones. But I will not say go, we will discuss with every terrorist in the, because terrorists by definition, they just want to kill people. But of course, our young people who are victims, many of them are victims of those groups. And many of them are victims because we as a government, as leaders, as a society, we fail to help these people so they are not exposed. It's their fragility that have been exploited. So I will just put it in a more subtle way that, yes, if we have our young people and who have been exposed, we should find a way using organizations, talking, a dialogue. We need to have them to be part of a dialogue. But it cannot be to discuss with everybody under all conditions. No. And Berit one, I'm not sure I have this question. If I had it, maybe I would be candidate for the presidential election in Mali. It's difficult. You know, I would not venture to there. But definitely, I think Mali today, the priority of the priority is to have the security in the country and to have the state to be able to be everywhere in the country. If there is a priority today and to stop the vicious cycle of this inter-community violence, militias, it means that the state is losing ground almost everywhere. People are taking the responsibility of the state to exercise it. So the first priority should be to ensure the human security and the security of the population, how we can protect our population, how we can bring them the social services, the justice system, education, to ensure the free movement of people so they can exercise their activity. For me, that's the first point, to ensure that the state, if I say the state, is in all its components, including the collectivities at the local level, everybody. So not just the army and the police. In my view, that will be the first point to work in a way that we can also ensure even the unity of the country is at risk today, because you have different groups in different parts of the territory exercising their own rights and things which also are undermining even the unity of the country. So if we are able to do that, I think today the most critical priority of the people is to enhance their living condition, to be able to have jobs, to eat, to have water, and to have all the basic needs to be satisfied. This is where people start, how we can decrease the pressure on the population, so that they don't have really to leave their country, and they are in the community, they have a decent life. And then we can look at maybe the rest that could come. But definitely, I think that is the starting point to make sure that we have a state, the state which assume its responsibility entirely, the state which is also fair, where every Malian, Tuareg, Bambara, Songhai, Dogons, everybody is under the law of the country. And then the state is not there to take side for one group or another. We are all Malian. I don't think that me or a Tuareg or a Fulani or anybody else, I have more right than anybody else. We are all from the same country. And we are only united by our country. And I think we don't need the others to come also to tell us what we should be doing, because our ancestors centuries ago were intelligent to have this social and political compromise. Why our generation could fail to achieve this and to carry this legacy? I think this is the challenge of our generation. We got this country as a legacy, but we have to make sure that we can also transmit it to the generation to come. The way we are today, I'm not sure this is what we want to leave to even ourselves or to the next generation. I think this is a challenge for me as a citizen. I'm not talking about minister or former minister, but a citizen and a Malian. My dream is to make sure that the country we live in when we were younger, we can carry that same country with the same value of solidarity, fairness, living together, tolerance, producing, raising our children to be also the force for good for our country, but also that our country can be also a force for peace and prosperity of the region. Because today, I didn't touch on that, Mali is a very strategic country. We are landlocked, surrounded by 7 neighbors. So the region cannot be stabilized if Mali is not stabilized. And that one, we have a responsibility to do that, we Malian. Frankly, I think we have to do something ourselves in the country.
Thank you so much. I see the time is running. You have a plane to catch, so we have to end at 12 sharp. But there are 2 more people on the list. So the gentleman here, please.
Thank you. My name is Amin Miziani. I am an Algerian diplomat. I'm deputy head of mission of Algerian embassy in Oslo.
Okay.
Excellency, I'm very proud. Alhamdulillah. So we can understand each other. Yeah. I think you guessed my question, Excellency. Thank you for your presentation first. It was very useful for me. I learned a lot. My question is about the peace agreement signed in Algiers in June 2015.
Negotiated in Algiers but signed in Mali.
Ah, okay.
In May and June 2015.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay,
I apologize.
No problem. No.
So 3 years after this peace agreement, you said that this agreement is not perfect. It was a political approach to settle the issue in Mali, because sometimes, I don't know whether you agree with me, military means are not efficient. I know what I'm talking about. 3 years after, my question is simple. Which side is responsible for no implementation of this peace agreement? And do you think you need to negotiate a new agreement, or the current situation now, evolution with maybe external actors, this agreement is not adapted at all at this current situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then the gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Sorin. I work with the Norwegian NGO NIST Foundation. We've been working for 4 years now with the Malian authorities, basically helping deliver basic services, mainly through the installation of solar streetlights in Gao, so public lighting using sun, as you recommended. Okay. So we've been doing that in Gao, but also in more remote areas such as Bamba and also the central region of Mopti, in places like Uwaru and Tenankou. My question to you was, based on your experience and from your perspective, do you have pieces of advice to organizations like ours when it comes to the way we work with the authorities of Mali, especially in places where state presence is very limited? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Before I give you the last 4 minutes, I'll give Morten the last 1 minute, or the kind of 5th minute of that, to just give a final comment.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to give my 30 seconds on the issue of bringing the state back in. I mean, obviously, it's not only about bringing the state back in, because the state that were there was a state that, at least in parts of Mali, wherein had severe problems, and not all those problems were external to the state. Some of them were very internal to how a state worked in many localities in Mali. Immense problems concerning corruption, mismanagement, courts that simply didn't work, and so on. So in many regards, I mean, Hamadou Koufa's men and others, when they have moved in and established their governance, I mean, what they competed against was sometimes not very much. So there are reasons why this happened, and we need to understand them. But then the question is how to bring a state back in. And what we need to realize now is that this is going to be a long and painful process, and it's going to be costly resource-wise. And we cannot, there is no way one is going to be able to do this at once all across the central region and the north. So the only way, in my point of view, to deal with this is a pooling of resources into certain targeted areas, very cynically leaving other areas behind, in order to basically pool resources to show that it's possible to bring back a state that actually works better, both better than the previous state, and it works better than the governance practices that are currently being tried, implemented by some of the insurgents, as I prefer to call them. Hopefully, this can create a momentum that then can be rolled out on a larger geographical scope. But this is, in my point of view, the only way we can deal with this. And this means very cynically that one, in the short-term horizon, basically has to leave some people behind. I'm sorry, but I don't see any other alternative. But the last word is yours.
Yeah, I just can conclude that you are not a political leader. As a political, there is no way you could do that. If I am a president or prime minister of Mali, I think...
Well, at least you couldn't say it.
No. Yeah, you can say. You are a research institution. You know, you have your option, hypothesis, and all that. But yes, when you are a leader, you have to manage to provide services everywhere that is needed. And because it's difficult to say, I will choose Koro, not bankers. I think, okay. But regarding Mr. Meziani, thank you very much. I owe a lot to Algeria. I studied in Algeria at the École Nationale d'Administration for 4 years. Algerian government gave me a scholarship to study there. So thank you for giving me the most valuable resource, which is education. I stayed also in Algeria for almost 8 months during the negotiation with the rebels. We have to show our appreciation and thanks to the Algerian government for bringing all Malians, and because Algeria see the Malians' problems as their own problem. Who is responsible for the lack of implementation? I think we should all be ashamed that 3 years after having signed this agreement, not much progress have been done, not as much as the Malian expect us to be moving. And everyone should bear this responsibility. But primarily it's the responsibility of the government, we as a government. Because, you know, when we are with the movement, if things does not work, you are the government. You are responsible. Of course, I know in the course of the event, there are some responsibilities from the government, but also we have movement, we have the situation on the ground. the insecurity. We spend also many months just in the bureaucratic processes just to implement the agreement. Maybe the way some of the agreement have been framed also did not help to broaden the understanding of the partners, how we'll be doing. So even our partner, I think everybody has a responsibility, but the biggest responsibility is always with the government, whether we accept or not. But at the same time, we don't have anything else if we say, okay, let's put the agreement aside and do something else. That's not possible. We know the agreement is not perfect. It was negotiated in the difficult context. The agreement that were made were the most advanced that we could get under those circumstances. But it's a framework. You know, this agreement is between us. It means that we decide not to do the war, but to find a solution. Now, in peace, we can even go beyond what is in the agreement. So I think we have first to implement the key provision, security, and development provision of the agreement. If we do that, there is a new situation, which is the center part of because when we were negotiating, we didn't have this insurgency. So I think going forward in the dialogue that need to take place among Malian, we need to also look at the situation not only of the north, but also in the center, and to see what solution we can provide. We cannot say only that the focus is in the north. No, the focus is on the north and in the center, which is also linked, because we had the problem in the center because we did not resolve the problem in the north. I think that's our responsibility. And yes, how to work with it will be pretentious for me just to say that. It's difficult. But I think specifically where you say there is no state presence, which is quite even difficult. But the first is to see local partners. Because some of the time, you know, when you are external organization, you come in the place, you have terrorists, you have people who are taking hostages, and it's quite difficult. Sometimes local NGOs and local partner or constructors can evolve quite easily in the environment without being noticed. And the second is, where even you don't have maybe the officials on the ground, make sure that you keep the line of the dialogue with the authorities who have even where I always tell people, even where the Malian government has no foot on the ground, we are responsible. It's our country. So make sure that the authorities on the ground knows what you are doing, can provide you with the assistance. Even when we are not there, we have maybe other part of the society that can be advised to provide assistance to work with. So make sure what you're doing is known at certain level with the authority, and have a local partners to work with and to be less visible. Because that will, I think we have a responsibility. If a friend come in our country, try to help us, and end up in a dangerous situation, which we don't want you to be in. But definitely, I think with the efforts going on now, I think the government should be in the position to ensure more security for people as well as our guests who are visiting. I'm glad to see that you are working on this solar. It's a very important step. We need to maybe do it at a different scale. That's what is frustrating. I think the solar is the answer, and personally, I know a lot have been done to work on the cost, to work on the technology, but we need definitely to make it a much bigger investment than we do today. It's not on you, but I think we need to bring in also different type of partnerships to work together to make it a reality in many areas of our country.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for coming all the way to share your knowledge and insights with us. It was very interesting. We very much appreciate it. So please join me in a big hand of applause to the Ambassador.
Tack. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
It was fantastic.
Oh, thank you.